When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 6 of Insatiable. This season, our theme is radical healing and what's possible when we get to the cause of what ails us. And again, we're using Angela Davis, the activist's definition of radical, which is getting things out at the root. And we heal when we're in choice, not when everything goes our way. So we're going to explore how to get to the root of our stories and what radical healing changes in our lives. Before we get to today's episode, I just want to remind you and invite you to Truce with Food, which will begin in January 2019. Truce with Food is my personalized online coaching experience to create long-lasting food freedom. We all know diets are a losing battle. We also don't want to give up on our health goals. So what do? I call Truce with Food Option C. And I would love to have you in the program. It only opens once a year, so don't miss out. You can join the waitlist at alishapiro.com/trucewithfood2019. Now on to today's episode. Part of radical healing is discovering our individual story. Often we rely on the story without conscious intention. The key here then is to acknowledge we are the author of our story, so we can rewrite it however we want. In today's episode, Radical Healing, Redefine Wellness, I invited Alanna Gardner to discuss healing through holistic health and wellness. Alanna is going to share her story about the heart attack at age 25, which altered the course of her life, and how relationships with ourselves and our partners can facilitate or regress our healing, and the healing effects of transforming one's trauma so that we don't just survive, but we thrive. A little bit more about our very special guest, Alanna, today. Alanna is a marriage and family therapist and a wellness powerhouse in the city of Philadelphia, working to holistically improve the quality of her clients' lives and relationships. Serving as an individual and relationship therapist and fitness professional, Alanna employs the core values of authenticity, accountability, and affirmation as a base for doing the deep work to develop the physical, mental, and emotional fortitude necessary to move from surviving to thriving in life. Thank you so much for being here today, Alanna.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Yeah, you are a good friend of Juliet, who is obviously a big friend of the pod and previous co-host. And so many people told me I had to connect with you, and good people. So I'm really excited to have you here. So let's start at, my God, a heart attack at 25. And just, I'm going to leave it at that and let you tell us what's important to know.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm still very astonished by, having something so major happen to me. But yeah, so I had in my last semester of my last year of graduate school, I set out to run the Broad Street Run. But before that, I was training, and I was at that time in the best shape of my life. I was swimming, I was running, I was lifting weights, I was doing all these different classes in preparation for the Broad Street Run. And so what ended up happening was that I did the organ donor dash in, go figure, but I was doing the organ donor dash in April of 2012. And I was running with a friend. We were pacing for the race. And I just, I didn't feel like my best. And I had ran, it was only a 10K. So I had ran, longer distances than that before. So I had told my friend, I knew that she was pacing. I was like, it's absolutely fine. Go ahead of me. It's not a big deal. And so I ended up crossing the finish line, and I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to faint. I couldn't find, my friend or, anybody like an EMT or anything. So I was like, you know what, I'll just sit on the finish line, and somebody will, end up finding me. And the reason why I just kind of say it so nonchalantly is because I've had a history of fainting. So fainting was nothing new to me. I had been fainting since I was like 4, gone to various specialists and, nothing, like every result was like sort of inconclusive. And I think the last time I had really sort of, majorly fainted in like my adult life, I was 18 and I was at college, and it was under the circumstances and guises of like a college party. So I was like, oh, well, I probably was doing something to bring that onto myself. And it was extreme dehydration, that sort of thing. So I was like, okay, I'm taking my health into my own hands. And I didn't have like another fainting spell until this moment. So, imagine my surprise when I wake up, in a hospital room and I have like way more IVs than normal. I had a tube down my throat. And, I was like, oh man, like I must have really been dehydrated this time. And they removed the tubes. And that's when they told me like, yeah, like you had a massive heart attack. You've been in a coma for like 3 days.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was in a medically induced coma. The race was a Sunday. I had woke up like on a Wednesday.
I'm just trying to like, I've been in a hospital in vulnerable situation, but I'm imagining like what goes through your mind. I mean, you're like, it's 3 days later and I didn't faint. I had a massive heart attack.
Can I tell you, I don't know whether or not it was just denial or if it was just, 25-year-old naiveness, but they took the tubes out, like they undid the tubes, and that my mind was still in go mode. So they took the tubes out of like my mouth and out of my throat. And the doctor said the first thing I said was like, ugh, like that was gross. And then the second thing was like, hey, like I have like an interview on Thursday. What's the next steps? I have to go home and finish like writing my master's thesis. What's the deal? And that's when they told me that I was out for like the past 3 days and that I actually went into cardiac arrest like once or twice and had to be like resuscitated. And they did like, they placed in a stent in one of my arteries. They were like, yeah, we had to do like a lot of work to keep you here. You're in the ICU. You're in the cardiac care unit. So for me, I think I had tunnel vision. Like none of that mattered to me at 25. I had my life set on like what it was that I wanted to do. I was so close to graduation, literally weeks away from graduation. I had a plan and I wanted to stick to the plan. So I think it really didn't hit me until like they were like, no, you have to have open heart surgery.
Wow. So not only did you go through all this, but then you have to go back under.
Mm-hmm. So the timeline of everything was that April was the heart attack. And then I was in the hospital for 20 days because for anybody who knows anything about like having a heart attack or people who've had heart attacks, you're not allowed to leave until 1, they figure out what caused it, 2, how they could stabilize you, and then 3, how you can sort of go out into the world and sort of live on your own without sort of, collapsing and, doing more injury to yourself. So I was released and I had like this life vest that literally looked like a giant like purse/camera thing. So I was walking around with that. I had to graduate. I had to move out of my housing. And then June 6th, I believe, I went back into the hospital for the surgery.
And what did they determine the cause? Because I think what's so fascinating about this and is that you were in really good shape, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think so often in our culture, we incorrectly connect health and weight. And we think like, oh, if you're in shape and doing all this stuff, like this stuff can't happen to you. But that's not true. Yeah. So what did they determine was the cause?
So this is actually, and this is, and I'm happy that you asked this because just to clear it up. So a lot of people have this conception, not only that you have to be like, out of shape or unhealthy, whatever that means, to people in order to have a heart attack, but people also don't recognize that heart disease encompasses, it's a large umbrella. So even though I was a healthy person and an active person, an in shape person, I still had heart disease because I have a misplaced left coronary artery. And so what that means is that if you look at the heart, there's, 2 sides. There's the left side and the right side. And my heart looks like I have 2 right coronary arteries when that's not the case. My left coronary artery does a lot of gymnastics between the other major arteries in order to continue to pump and feed blood to the left-hand side of my heart. And so that also contributed to the symptoms I was having at the time. So the fainting and what it would look like. It would look like I was having a seizure, but what was actually happening was that the left coronary artery was being pinched by two other major arteries, and the left coronary artery feeds blood to the left-hand side, which feeds blood to everything from basically the chest up. So what looked like seizures or epilepsy or fainting really was a constriction around the left coronary artery. And what sort of led to the heart attack was the fact that this go round, the artery didn't open back up, which led to congestive heart failure, which led to the heart attack.
Wow. I am so glad that you explained that too, because I did an episode. It's episode 75, if anyone's curious. It's called Your Green Juice Doesn't Make You Worthy. And I talked about how the American belief of meritocracy, which for those of you listening, one of our cultural stories here in America is that what you get in life is based on merit. So we've all heard work really hard and you'll get what you deserve. And this translates into our health conversation because it's a cultural myth. So it translates into everything. And it's a myth. Like it's not, I mean, it might be true for certain people, but for most of us in America, and it's to different degrees. It's not completely untrue or true, but there's varying degrees to working hard pays off. But how this translates into health is we think that thin people are disciplined, or people who get cancer weren't trying hard enough, right? Or or people who have a heart attack. Oh, what were you doing? What were you eating? We always want to blame the victim in part because of this meritocracy myth, when really health is this big mystery. Like the body is like the symbol of the great mystery.
Yeah. And what's so crazy about that is that it actually brings me to a comment that was left on an article written about me. And I went and I think I shared my story either with like Philly.com or the Inquirer or someone. And it was like, in terms of sharing the story for heart health awareness. And I will never forget. And here's the thing. I went against my rule. I have a rule on social media as well as like blog posts and all that. And it's like, don't read the comments. That is my rule. Like, it's honestly not worth it. So unless like it's being shared like on your own personal page and like you have to pay attention to it and then you're sharing it with people who love you. If it's on like somebody else's stuff, you're guaranteed to see something that's negative. And of course, I went against what it was that I sort of hold myself to. And I read a comment and it was like, oh, wow, like how ignorant of, this woman and her family to not even like reach out and employ doctors or, basically saying that like me and my family were negligent. Absolutely not. We were not negligent. We did the best that we could. And we had like these relationships with like, with CHOP and with these people and with that person. And my mom was like really consistent with it. And if anything, the system kind of failed us, like or either like they just didn't know what was going on. So there was so many other factors that sort of played a role, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. So that victim blaming is something that, I'm often like met with when I do share my story, because people think that, because I was young or because, sometimes, there's this myth around, not myth, but people of color do have a strained relationship with the medical field, with medicine. And we always didn't have like a sort of, healthy relationship with medicine because of racism and certain sort of prejudices. But that wasn't the case for my family. People were fighting hard for us and we were fighting hard for me and my own health and wellness. And it was to the point where I was just so fed up that I was like, I'm just going to take matters into my own hands because nothing is being done.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up as well. Yeah, I think people forget that like your doctors don't know all the answers. It doesn't mean they don't know any of the answers, but the system, you have individual people in a very bad system that is, although it's also a good system, right? It's like, it's also nuanced and complex, but
it's very nuanced.
But you can be trying so hard and monitoring things and people still not know things until you know them. And
yeah.
I think everyone wants to find a reason because it makes them feel safer. Like, well, oh, that way that wouldn't happen to me, right? It's really about protecting their own like emotional safety mentally of like, okay, I would have caught that because of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember
Mm-hmm.
after being diagnosed with cancer and like I would read like how people died and I was like, what didn't they do? Like it was just me trying to hedge my own risk because I was so traumatized.
Yeah.
So I could totally relate to like you wanting to just like push forward and because I did that same thing with my cancer and I did not address the PTSD. They didn't even I was the first generation of childhood cancer survivors, so they didn't even know like that we needed emotional support. So I don't blame anyone or anything, but it was just like it would have been really useful. So when did you start to realize that you needed to address the emotional component of this, especially given that you're a therapist and relationship, especially?
Woo! Man. So, all right. So mind you, that there's different levels and I think layers to the story and different pieces. So the first thing was that I knew very early on when they said that I was going to have open heart surgery that the first piece wasn't hard. So like experiencing the heart attack and then sort of being in the hospital for the first 20 days and everything that happened in that first 20 days, I knew that that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was going to be post-surgery. Because, the thing about it was that everybody wanted to be there, I think, post-heart attack. But not everyone was going to continue to be there post-heart attack.
Mm.
Because what people sort of think is that, oh my God, that she might not make it. And regardless of whether or not people say, oh, I didn't have a doubt or whatever, the way that people were coming out in droves is one, because they want to support, and two, because there was a layer of she might die. And I think people are like getting you to the point of the heart surgery. And after that, oh, you're out of the woods. So you go from this tremendous amount of support through what seems like the crisis point to what seems like the healing point, but the healing journey is very lonely.
Mm.
When literally like I'm trying to recover. I couldn't do anything for myself. Not a single thing. And to have the people, only a handful of people closest to you really know what your day in and day out looks like. And the craziest part about it, what's really sort of like a warp for me, was that my physical body healed very quickly. So because I was so active, because I was so fit, because I was young and, had this heart surgery, the physical body probably was like healing up way faster than the mental and emotional self was healing. Because I literally went from being like a 25-year-old who was extremely outgoing, had a very active physical as well as social life, was the person that, a lot of people really depended on, to I couldn't even like lift a purse. I wasn't even allowed to work out. I wasn't allowed to tap in and do any of the things that sort of essentially at the time made me me. And so that was the hardest part. And being 25 and, the life of a normal 25-year-old, I could not participate in any of that. There was no going to the bar. There was no going out dancing. There wasn't any of that. I literally began to go from like living like a 25-year-old to living like I was like geriatric.
Yeah, I'm like tearing up because I know what that loss feels like. It's really hard.
It's extremely hard. And I think, and what made it even harder is that anybody else who was my age just couldn't understand unless they had something similar. Like they just didn't get it. And it wasn't for the sake of like they didn't want to get it. It's just like either they're being overprotective or either they're just like, well, you're physically fine. Like I want to get back, like, well, I need you, or I need you to be like who you were before. And it was such a loss of a lifestyle and essentially of everything that I, built my identity around.
Yeah, well, I was thinking even like your outlet, like losing, like fitness was such an outlet probably for stress relief from all your schooling and the pressure of a master's program and, and being a 25-year-old where you're like, the 20s are hard, right? You're like exploring things. And then to have your outlet, not only your identities, but your outlets be in a way is just like, That's so, and I love how you really phrased and made that distinction, whereas like your physical body healed rather quickly. And I think that's an important point for listeners is like, sometimes we think, well, like if anything can happen, what's the point? But what happens afterwards, you were in such great shape that enabled that piece. But I think that's such an important distinction that people don't talk about enough, like the emotional, and I call it like the soul or the spiritual part of that, it lags behind.
Yeah. And then also, I think, having the experience helps me to relate to a lot of my clients, because basically what's walking through my door is invisible illness, right? A lot of mental health is invisible illness unless you are someone who is at the point of crisis or at the point of psychosis. So waking up every morning with anxiety and living and like walking throughout your day with anxiety, or walking throughout your day with like depression or an eating disorder. These are all things that no one can see until you're at the breaking point. But being somebody who also, is a survivor of, the invisible illness or the trauma or the grief after, I relate to that and I see that. And I know how hard it is to wake up and get out of the bed every day with your invisible illness.
That was very well put. I just kind of want to let you keep talking.
And that was the crazy part, is like I was walking around outside of like the scar. There was nothing at that point in time that let people know that I just emotionally and mentally did not have it. And I think I also, a lot of my relationships at the time were set in such a way that no one was used to me not being available or used to me not having it. Not a single person. And so it was perplexing for them, but it was 10 times more perplexing for me, because I was just like, I don't even know what to do with myself. And what was crazy is that there was a moment when I was in the hospital and they were actually like talking about surgery, and they were like, oh, well, you should also be mindful. You might get the blues, blah, blah, blah. And they kept going.
And they call them the blues, like infantile, like diminishing them. Oh, they're the blues. It's like,
yeah. Yeah. And my thing was like, holy crap, there's so many people who are having these major surgeries to their bodies, and no one's saying anything about the mental, emotional, relational, or spiritual toll that it takes to have your body ravaged in such a way.
Yeah. And that's, oh my God, I want to ask you about that and kind of how your own healing, giving other people what you weren't given. But I want to back up about the relationship piece. In terms of, I see this with a lot of my clients, a lot of their overeating is I have this comfort eating style quiz. And one of the styles is the accommodator. And they tend to be the givers, right? They're like the people who are always putting everyone first. And it's a great thing to do. And it can border on basically enabling people, or, it's easier to give because people are always going to accept, and it's harder to ask for things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No. And so how was that for you in terms of all of a sudden you were the one who needed help? I'm imagining that some people stepped up and other people, you lost that relationship, or you just didn't.
It was a combination of everything. So, I'm very thankful to my husband, who at the time was just like my boyfriend. But my husband, he stepped up to the plate and like stepped like above and beyond. And I will also say that like one of the blessings, I think, in me having the heart attack was recognizing that, I was somebody who was an accommodator, and that I was somebody who didn't ask for help and as much as I needed to, and who was just like, you know what, I'm going to get it done come hell or high water. However it is that I have to get it done, I'm going to get it done. But that also, like, I just was not good at asking for help. I wasn't good at like allowing people to help me. And so I always joke, like, the heart attack showed me how independent I was to a fault. You know what I mean? Like, it was to the point where I was like irritated at times that people were just like checking in on me. Like, I was just like, why do you keep asking me about like this heart stuff? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was almost like is there no, and again, there's also that level of like, it was probably just too much at times. It was like my identity was now being shaped by being a heart attack survivor, or being someone who is like physically broken, or being someone who can't do much. And for somebody who is fiercely independent, that is like, ooh, that is like absolutely not. I do not want to be identified as that. So, there was lots of people who were able to hold space for me. For anybody who is listening to this, you know who you are. Like, you know who you are. And then there was like a lot of relationships that I lost during that time period because they just weren't able to uphold that emotional piece for me or hold space for me in a way that was healthy. And they weren't able to recognize that there's periods of times in your life where it is imbalanced. It's not always going to be 50-50. So, and in understanding, like, I'm also very sensitive to that. Like, it's like, listen, you don't have to do anything for me right now. I know that you don't have it. I'm just here to give it to you. And I think a lot of people aren't that self-aware, and especially in your 20s, no one's self-aware of that. Everybody's like, I needed to
absorbed.
I'm so absorbed. I need to be 50-50. And really that 50-50 means like 60-40 or 70-30 or 80-20. And so there was a lot of that for me at that time.
Well, and I think too, it's important for people to realize, like, if relationships ending, it doesn't mean that they failed or that either person is necessarily a bad person or, he said, she said. It's just like, because life changes so abruptly, sometimes those relationships are over and they weren't a failure. They were great while they lasted, but people's needs changed. And that's just, I mean, this phrase, it is what it is, but I think it's important for people to realize, like, just because I had a friendship a couple years ago over the election, and I still cherish the time that we had together, and things change and we moved in a new direction, so it's like, I don't have ill will towards that person. It just, so I think, I don't know. I don't know if you feel that way as well. Like, sometimes relationships just have their natural ending.
Yeah. And so I think, another great, I mean, there's so many lessons throughout this experience, but one of the lessons was that, like, when something needs to come to an end, you got to allow it to end.
How do you do that? I'm sure everyone wants to know.
And so it was very much, I had a couple of experiences where it was like, Alanna, you're trying to hold on to this, so I'm just going to snatch it from you. I think that, like, the heart attack came at a time where my life was about to transition, and I was going to hold on to a lot throughout the transition that didn't need to continue to be held on to. And so the heart attack snatched it. It was like, oh, okay, you're someone Alanna, we know how you are. We're just going to end this for you. Thanks. Here's this heart attack. And it just came at a time where, looking back on it, I needed to let go of a lot of situations, a lot of behaviors, a lot of ways of how I identified myself and relationships at that time period that I wasn't going to do it on my own at 25. I just wasn't.
Well, I love that you say it's about letting go, because I think in our health and wellness and fitness world, people think it's about adding more stuff, right? Like, okay, let me do the smoothie, the supplements, the workouts, the weights. And it's like, I find that health is about simplifying and removing to the core of of who we really are. You don't need all the supplements if you've got, if you get to the root cause of things. You don't need all the everything if you get to the root cause of things, I guess is the way that I say it.
Yeah. And sometimes the best way to add is to subtract.
Ooh, I like that. Yes, totally.
And that's what it is. The best way, the only way you can add is to subtract.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, there's so many things I want to circle back to, but one of the things was you saw this huge gap, right, in terms of this invisible illness that you're walking around with. And so how has that shaped? I really do believe healing happens when we give other people what we wish we would have had, right? And we could have and so that opens up our wound rather than closing it up and becoming bitter and resentful. And it doesn't mean we don't feel that way at times. I'm not going to say
it's a journey. It's a journey.
Yeah, but how has that totally shifted how you are as a therapist? You also have your own company, Alanna, the MFT.
Like my tagline, and I will be like releasing, more things later on. But I think what it really shaped for me was that it opened up the doors to a career and a life that I thought I had to be very like established and older and more tenured in my life in order to even step into.
Mm.
So I realized, and I'll be totally forthcoming, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being forthcoming about this, but I was in like a state of like depression. It was post-surgery depression.
Mm.
I
How could
had,
you not be?
yeah, it was post-surgery depression. My body was ravaged, you know what I mean? And it's like my body was ravaged in order to produce healing, but sometimes healing can be very violent. And surgery, open heart surgery, is literally the cracking open of like people's ribs and bones and moving of these things and cutting and placing and the bypassing of these different arteries in order to give me a better quality of life.
Mm.
I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't take it back for the world. But it is, when you think about it, a very sort of violent thing to happen to the body.
Yeah.
And then when you add in the psychological losses, the relational losses, the physical losses, and all that, it's grief. It's grief. It's identity shifting. It all builds and it layers and it led me to my state of, where I was at the time. And so I was like, man, all right, I know that like I need to work because I like that's something that I value. Like I need to work and I need to physically get me back. What can I do? I can't get a full-time job. I'm just not well enough yet to get a full-time job. I can't live on my own. So I can't be in Philly. I can't do these things I used to do. What can I do? And it was at that time period that, I was invited to start, private practice. And what's crazy is that you would think that being like my, at the time, 26-year-old self, because I had, turned 26, that I think like being in the state that I was in, it allowed me to take the blinders and the limits off and just lean into, all right, I'm going to open up a private practice,
Mm.
which then led me to, all right, I established that. And then, one of my colleagues was like, hey, like, Alanna, like you used to go to spin class all the time. Like Flywheel is like opening up around the corner from our office. And I was like, what the heck is Flywheel? And so I go and I look at it and it's like an indoor cycling, studio. And I was like, could I do that? And so I went to an audition and clearly the audition showed me that I was not physically where I wanted to be. But I took on a job part-time as being like a studio coordinator there and working at the front desk. And I really spent that time period. It was probably, I want to say 6 months, like building my private practice and then also like working part-time. And like I was writing like all the time. And I knew in my mind that like as I was like writing in these classes and as I was sitting with these people, I had this image of who I wanted to be in the future. And I held on to that and I latched onto that and I put all my energy and my effort into that and I did it in my own time.
I freaking love that because what you're saying there, I think, is something that gets lost in the conversation around identity shifting, as that when everything is falling apart, when that old identity is falling away, as hard as that is, it also, as you said, it drops down limits, right? It opens up possibilities, and that's something too that if we're willing to stand in almost that, like, I guess the word nakedness came to me. It's like, okay, if I don't have this, this, or this, we can start to see new possibilities and maybe what life is asking of us at this point. So thank you for adding that, because I think sometimes we forget that, right? Like there's nothing is all bad or all good or all hard or all helpful. Like there's challenges in keeping with your identity as well, right?
Yeah. And so for me, it was really this journey of, all right, I know who I was. What parts of who I was can pivot into that I could take on the journey with me, right? And so in my nakedness, at the time I didn't realize it, but I was leaning into all these things, it was health and wellness. I was always going to be health and wellness. And I think that health and wellness is something that's like my mission. It's my passion. It's something that never tires. It's the thing that I consistently have a relationship with. And the relationship, it just turns and shifts and changes into different, manifests in different roles and responsibilities and ways of functioning. So I was like, all right, I was in this grad school program. I know I still want to be a therapist. All right. I thought that was going to look like doing agency work or doing, this sort of 9-to-5 type deal until I was like 50. I don't know why I had 50 in my head, but like 50 seemed like a really great time to be like someone who starts doing private practice. Right? Because again, it's like I needed to, I guess that being tenured meant I had to have this very lengthy established career in the field in order to give myself permission to reach for private practice.
Mm.
And then, with becoming like an indoor cycling instructor with Flywheel, that was the thing that, like, riding in those classes really blew open the door for me. And it was like, okay, this can transition into something else. Oh, wow, I have a career in fitness now. Never, ever would have thought that I'd be teaching at all. Never.
Yeah, let's make it. You eventually became an instructor. I think I cut off I went on a tangent, which I am prone to do.
Oh, no worries.
But, well, and so as you're saying this, I'm thinking about how to really heal, we have to go back to the scene of the trauma, right? So how do you feel getting back into shape at that level, knowing that when you were training last time, I mean, I'm sure you had been, exercising since then. Mm-hmm. To be at the level of a Flywheel instructor, how did you manage that, knowing that like last time you were training that intense, like at a time, maybe not the last time, but there was a time training that intensely, it was for the Broad Street Run, but that's when you had the heart attack. How did you manage that vulnerability and possibility, right? There's always possibility and vulnerability.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy? Again, I don't know whether or not it's just this like being naive, or I think it's more of, I've had such a long history with being physically limited that I had no problem leaning fully into teaching or like being this sort of person that has to have a certain level of physical wellness in order to do these things. Like I was the type of kid where, even if I knew that there was a chance of me like fainting, F it, I'm gonna do it anyway. And there was something about like, being limited by like my physical limitations or by this possibility that just made me lean into it even more. I was like, well, I don't care, whatever, I'm gonna do it. It was to the point where like my mom was like, I'm taking you out of sports. I'm taking you, like, you can't do gymnastics anymore. You absolutely cannot do field hockey. We don't know what the problem is, because she knew her daughter. Like I would literally run myself to the point of fainting, and not because of like ignorance or whatever the case may be. It was like this, like, oh, I'm going to show you, I'm not going to be limited by this. So when the time came for me to, kind of hold on to this possibility of being like a Flywheel instructor, I was like, even though we had a training program, I literally was like, I know who I'm going to be on the bike. I know what my identity is going to be. I know how I want to ride. I know what I want to look like. It was like I was training for a marathon. I would go in and I would take like classes like regularly. And I'd be like, what did I like about this class? What didn't I like about this class? How can this be manifested through me? So in my mind, there was never like a fear or an anxiety of anything, of being like, oh my God, what if I faint up there? Oh my gosh, like, no, none of that. I was just like, no, I'm doing this thing.
So it sounds like it's just like, it's the core of who you are, which I think is beautiful, that the heart attack it just amplified that, right? And rather than kind of taking you out of the game, because you could have said, I don't know, no more of that for me.
There is moments where my husband was like, Alanna, I swear, like, stop it. Like, I'm talking like, oh, when can I, like, maybe I'll go for like, maybe I'll do some jumping jacks. Maybe, like, I know like sometimes people will like see these like challenges that kind of go around on like Pinterest or on like social media where it's like, all right, 30-day ab challenge or like 30-day like hit routine challenge. That's how I got back into like fitness. And my husband would be like, there would be times where like he'll come into the room like mid me working out and would just stare at me. And he'd be like, are you like, this woman is going to like, I don't know whether or not he was staring out of fear or out of like awe or maybe like a little bit of both. But he was like, you are like literally nuts. You're going to make me have a heart attack. Please sit down.
Well, are there certain things that you know to monitor in yourself now so that you don't have another heart attack?
So for me, I have a very sort of tight relationship, with all of my healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, there isn't really anything that I'm limited in doing. And that was the whole point of me getting the open heart surgery done. That's what made me say yes to it. Because I could have easily been like, you know what, I'm just going to ride out with this stint for the rest of my life. Like, I don't, but I knew that surgery had to happen in order for me to have the quality of life that I wanted. And that I knew that I deserved. I deserved to be this person who can fully embrace everything that health and wellness has to offer. And I didn't want to be limited. And so I went into it knowing that open heart surgery for me was going to be extremely painful because those bones are solid. I was always the youngest person on the unit, but I was willing to go lean into what life might be for me after the fact because it was the hope and the promise of having a life that was less about surviving and more about thriving. And that's something that's definitely a tagline for me. When people come and see me, I want to take you from surviving to thriving. And so for me, I had to lean into, and I knew that I was going to accept, what my body might look like after open heart surgery or how horrible I may feel for a little bit because there's a bigger prize at the end of it.
As you're talking, I'm just like, you have so much self-trust, which I admire so much. And I imagine that's why you're such a powerful therapist, because you can take a stand for other people because you've done it for yourself.
Well, thank you for that. I'm telling you, it was a journey to kind of getting to the point of having, this level of self-trust. And I think I didn't even realize, that it was like this concept of self-trust that I was like sort of leaning into. But I was like, I'm all about quality of life. I think health and wellness serves as like a base of like allowing you to have the quality of life that you want. And if your quality of life diminishes, your light diminishes. And so for me, I just could not see myself being, 35 and not being able to walk up a flight of stairs or not being able to lift up another weight or not being able to run again. I just couldn't see it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the self-trust though, right? And like, I've got blinders on, this is what I want. And that's not, blinders aren't a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, so what's interesting to me too is kind of mentioning your husband, and he was like, you thought he was going to have a heart attack, and how even though some relationships let go, the ones that stayed were even stronger. And you're clearly like, even though you're a fitness instructor and you've continued in the therapy realm, focusing on relationship to self and others. And how have you learned to value that, I guess, as a result of this? Because I think sometimes we think, relationships, but it's really what you eat and how you work out, right? Like that's what, and it's what your cholesterol is and your insulin, right? Like we're such a we only count what we can measure in a way, right? And I know.
Oh yeah.
I just would love to hear your take on, because you have the best, I've just been writing down quotes for the social media episode on this. So many good quotes you've said. So I would just love to hear how you talk about and emphasize that with your clients, how important relationships are when you can't always measure them.
Yeah. And what's crazy, not crazy, but what's really interesting is that I tend to attract a majority of my clients. They are very much the measured, I need to see results. I attract those type of people.
Because they want to get out of that. They want to be like you.
Yeah. And for a while, it was hard for me to be able to sit with people like that. But then I realized that they were coming to me because I'm both. I have the capacity to be both. So I know for me, I know how important it is I try to only associate myself with things that are effective, right? So flywheel is effective because, you're able to measure we have that technology to measure that, right? I also teach over at SLT. SLT is effective because you're able to see the results and to feel like how your body feels post a megaformer class. And for me, the space of therapy is more abstract. And so for me, I always say that, health and wellness and fitness and the way that you eat and all that is going to be the pillars to get you to your next therapy appointment.
Mm.
And I view, wellness as holistic. If you're working on your, the mental and emotional stuff, side of it, why not work on your body? Why not work on, the whole entire gambit of health and wellness? It should be, it shouldn't be isolated. It should be everything. And so I really try to create a bridge, and I use a lot of fitness metaphors and examples in, my therapy sessions so that people are able to understand the concept that like health and wellness starts in the mind. And if you don't have it in the head, you are not going to have it anywhere else. Building that mental and emotional fortitude and having that play out in your sort of, relationships and the relationship dynamics, whether it be romantic, family, friends, at work. All of it is, your life is sort of a stage for being able to see how healthy you actually are. And so if you're not able to do it mentally and emotionally first, you're not going to be able to do it in any other capacity either.
Yeah. And our relationships, I mean, I'm reading this book right now. It's called Before You Know It. It's about the unconscious. And it's a lot about how like moods are contagious, the people we hang out with, like moods are contagious, like all this kind of stuff. And so I imagine relationships are even more important than we're often thinking about it, right? First, our relationship with ourselves and that mental and health stuff, but also supporting the people. I like how you said, like, what gets results? Like supporting yourself with people who are going to, or connecting, I should say, with people who are going to support you, like the results that you want.
Absolutely.
Not like using them. I don't know if that came out wrong.
No, I know what you meant, but my thing is like something that I see very often is that like, and this is something that's pumped a lot. It's like, in order to work on yourself, you have to disconnect from everybody else. That's not always the case, right? So, for me, I work from the 3 pillars of authenticity, accountability, and affirmation. A huge part of the accountability piece is being able to, stand yourself and work through your own self and having these other people be a mirror to your own awareness of self and in your own way that you sort of work and you're processing and you're developing and changing. So a lot of times we'll hear people be like, oh, well, I just can't attach myself to anybody like right now. In a lot of ways, you can't, right? So if you know that you are that unhealthy, that not unhealthy, but that just out of it, that you can't literally be there for somebody else. Yes. But there comes a time period in your journey and your own self-worth that you got to buddy up with somebody. Somebody's going to trigger some stuff. And it's in the same way that like people go to classes as a way to be accountable, right? Some people are able to work out by themselves and really push themselves. And then some people, you can't. So you really got to lean into having, relationships of all kinds really serving as a mirror to what's happening with you.
Mm. I love that you said that. One of the earlier episodes in this season, I interviewed my client, Andrew Thacker, and we were talking about how he used to just want to be on an island, right? Like he thought that was how he was going to be healthy when really he was accommodating. He needed to address that very pattern. And
we think cutting off is like that fixes everything. No, that isolates everything. That you're not fixing the problem. You're just avoiding the problem.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. I think that's too, sometimes when I hear people say like, you have to put yourself first. I agree with that, but I don't think there's a hierarchy, right? Like we can all be in this together, and it's not like what's good for me is bad for someone else, or what has to be, that's part of that accommodator frame of it's like either them or me, right? Or rather than, wait a second, there's not a scarcity of connection. There's not a scarcity of I don't know, of a lot of things. There was a scarcity of some things, but it doesn't have to be in our relationships, because I think connection and meaning and that kind of stuff just multiplies the more that we get in touch with our authenticity. One of your pillars, I would say.
And sometimes putting yourself first means leaning into the discomfort. You got to do the work. You got to lean into doing the work. And sometimes when that challenging relationship, or that relationship that triggers you in such a way that you're like, ooh, yikes, too tender, I got to cut it off. That's work. And I'm not talking about abuse, and I'm not talking about unsafe situations. I'm not talking about, like, that's not what I'm talking about. And I imagine that, like, anybody who was listening to this or will listen to this is going to be like, ugh, I know what she means. I want to hide from it. No. Lean in.
Well, first call you and then set up an appointment and then
get your to figure it out and then lean in.
Because sometimes we lean in and set the whole thing on fire, you know?
Yes. But there comes a point in our journey where we have all the tools that we need, but guess what? It doesn't matter if you don't put the practice in. You have to be willing to practice. You have to be willing to try. The willingness to try, the willingness to lean in, the willingness to look at yourself and to do the work.
I love this. And your story is so inspiring about doing the work, even when it's hard and freaking scary, like opening your chest up, right? And going in and then coming back from that. I think it's incredible. So speaking of leaning in, what's next for Alanna, themft.com, or your company?
Yeah. So what's next is just kind of, I think, putting myself out there a little bit more.
This is a good first step then, or second step, or third, or fourth.
It is. I think, I'm at a period where I'm pivoting a little bit, and there's a lot of change, and there's a lot of, things that are sort of, and doors that are opening, and it's time to take it to the next step. And this time around, it's a little bit more exciting, a little bit different than the last time, because there is no forced change. Right? This is me fully, like, looking at myself and looking at my career and looking at my life currently and leaning into putting myself out there in a way that I'm just kind of doing voluntarily, but it kind of needs to be done. So, there's a lot of great stuff in store. I'm looking to be a little bit more active on social media, which, for me sometimes feels a little strange, especially with the dichotomy of, like, being like a therapist, right? Therapists have this tendency to be a little bit more introverted, or, and
you can find nothing about them online when you try to Google them.
Yeah. I've learned very early on that does not work for me. That's not who I am. Again,
you're leaning with your path. I think that's something, a gift in things like when you face death, it's like, look, I'm here. This, if you go to the healing place, you develop an incredible resilience and unique vision.
Mm-hmm.
That has to come out.
So I'm, like, leaning into the fact fully that I'm not, like, this very much like this therapist or this person in health and wellness that's very extremely, like, I guess, like, academic and buttoned up and sort of distant. That's not who I am. So just, a sense of, like, building more of a community, putting myself out there, just sort of putting out content that people, want to hear, and things that I want to hear, and the things that I want to talk about, and just sort of developing in that capacity. So I'm very excited for that.
I love it. When you were saying, like, it's exciting because it's change of my choice, it made me think of, I listened to this podcast called How to Survive the End of the World. And it's really good. The beginning, in one of the beginning clips, they quote Octavia Butler, and she talks about how God is change. And I love that. And it's a very beautiful, like, whole paragraph. But the thing that I thought about, God is change. And I thought about how, however you define it, right? Like, your heart attack got you up close with change. And now you've been able to come out of that and now use it in a way that's yours, of your choosing. And I think that's the beauty in healing, is, like, you come face to face with God, however you define that, yourself, a great higher power, Jesus, whoever it is. And it's kind of like, you're like, hello, let's start a relationship. And now you're changing on your own terms, which I love. I love these kind of stories.
I love that you brought up that quote, and I'll definitely have to follow up with that, because I want to find that quote.
Yeah. For everyone listening, I'll include it in the show notes.
Thank you.
end of the world. Yeah, how to survive the end of the world.
But it reminds me of Iyanla Vanzant. She had did an interview with Oprah once, and she was like, for her, she has this saying where at first, sort of God throws like a pebble, right? And then he throws a rock. And then he throws a brick. And I think I'm at the heart attack was a brick. It was a brick. And just with the timing and everything that it sort of happened, it was a brick. And what was funny is that there was pebbles, and I'm not even talking about like with my physical body, because there was nothing else that I could do there. It was like with everything else it impacted, there was pebbles there. And then it was rocks. And then I was like, that's not that big of a deal. And then he was like, okay, girl, brick. So I'm trying to lean more into voluntary change and leaning more into the pebbles, because I'm tired of bricks being thrown at my head. I'm done. I don't want another brick. No. I don't want another brick. If I can kind of get in front of it, I'll get in front of it. Life is crazy enough and other things that will happen. I don't need to hit my own self upside the head with a brick. I'll take the pebble. Thank you very much.
I love it. And I know our listeners are going to love you, Alanna. Where can they find you on social media as you? We can say we found you before you totally blew up, even though.
So they can follow me on social media, Alanna G, the MFT. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. And they can also follow the private practice at Philadelphia MFT.
Wonderful. And we will have links to all of Alanna's social media and website also in the show notes of the podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Alanna.
No, it was my pleasure. This was great. And it was a beautiful experience. And I can't wait to kind of hear it back myself, because I think there was a lot that you shared and a lot of the way that you framed things about my experience that is of value for me and that I needed to hear. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. Well, I have learned so much from you. I have these quotes. They're just so powerful. So rather than having, hashtag Gandhi, it's going to be hashtag Alanna.
Thank you. You flatter me. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, again, if you are interested in joining Truths with Food, check out alishapiro.com/Truths with Food 2019. I'd love to have you there. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.